I want to start off by just kind of pointing out, I've noticed that my most viewed video, not that I'm somebody that's watched a whole lot, is my video saying that I think that Joel Skousen is out of line for taking circumstances and interpreting those like they're facts. I don't think we do talk like that in America. Yet at the same time, I want to be clear again, and I think I was quite clear in that video, that overall, the reason I pay attention to Skousen and even know what he says at all is because I've got a lot of benefit out of following the guy, right? And that's all there is to it. So I think that he's a nice contributor in so many ways. And I just wanted to make the point that I think conspiracy theorists have been getting out of control. They're too into this claiming to know the facts kind of thing. Which to me, as I study the American way, the system of justice, our whole attitude, if we ever become that kind of person, then, you know, even if we're like supposedly becoming that kind of person for the sake of defending our system, we're defending our system by a means that our system doesn't allow for, that by a means that violates the whole principles of our foundings. You're innocent until proven guilty. Circumstances are insufficient to say that you know the facts. And I did give Skousen credit for that. At times he's been really good at reading the circumstances anyhow, with the Russia thing and the fake dissolution of the Soviet Union, as he says it. It's obvious to me after listening to the Tucker Carlson interview that that's exactly what happened. You know, I think that. So anyhow, that's my thoughts on that. Well, anyhow, today I've been talking a lot about my 6 branches of responsibility, and they're even really, truly, you can call them empowered branches, right, of our Constitution. That's the Congress, the President, the judicial branch, the states. Article 4 and Article 5 could have been reasonably put together as a single article. And then Article 6, I find it clever that it's vague, the same way that Article 2 is vague, because if you put too many details into Article 2, you expose too much potential strategy, and you don't want to do that. And the same thing with Article 6, but the implied power I get from Article 6, Clause 3 is obviously every officer needs to know the Constitution for themselves, not rely on court interpretations of it or anything like that. And so I've said the obvious implied power of Article 6, Clause 3. If you have developed the talent, which you should develop the talent, if you ask me, if you take an oath of office to something, you need to have the talent to be able to interpret it, right? So, and be able to say then, okay, I know when I'm violating my oath of office versus when I'm not, okay? And then nullify any unconstitutional orders that you're given because you would be in violation of your oath. But now the 6th branch of responsibility is the people. And there seems to be an actual power that the founders were careful to reserve to us. First off, the people were responsible for doing the conventions in Article 7 of the Constitution. So, in other words, the Constitution opens up saying we the people, and it was ratified by conventions of the people. Each state kind of did it their own way. Basically, I'm not an expert on the whole ratifying convention thing. I'm not going to pretend to be. And I'm not even an expert on the next thing I'm about to hit. I'm not going to pretend to be. But there's an obvious connection. So my main thing is reading the Constitution and then pondering the rest of it. And anyhow, I've been pondering, especially after watching the movie John Adams and listening to other documentaries on the Revolutionary War and just thinking about the whole process. Honestly, the guy at 10th Amendment Center, Michael Bolden, he covers a lot of the thought process of the founding generation, which is awesome. I highly recommend his channel. Do I agree with all of his conclusions? No, but he is excellent at bringing out the history. And so anyhow, what I've noticed is when you get to the amendments, First Amendment, Second Amendment, and Third Amendment, and Fourth Amendment even, all of it, Fifth Amendment, it seems to basically say we commit to not being hypocrites. We commit to not letting our government become the same thing that the British government became that we felt we had to leave. And furthermore, we commit to a form of government that allows for the recreation of something similar to a Continental Congress if it ever comes down to being necessary, right? That's what I see. So what am I seeing? The right of the people peaceably to assemble, right? The right of the people peaceably to assemble. When the Continental Congress got together, there were 3 different declarations. They were carefully thought out. These were very tactful. They were trying to do things in a very carefully, legally thought out way, not in a riots in the street, mobocracy type of way. And so there was a Declaration of Rights and Grievances or something like that in 1774. Again, like I said, I'm not an expert on this. But the point is, they're telling the British, this is what's right compared to this is what you're doing, and it's unacceptable. In other words, they were very knowledgeable of the Constitution, you might say. Very knowledgeable of what the right way of running the British government should have been. And anyhow, didn't work. You've got then hostilities building up. The British are coming for guns. The British are, basically quartering soldiers in houses, all this kind of stuff. So I think I talked about, first off, there was after the Stamp Act, there was Great Britain, what's the name of the declaration, where they basically said, okay, fine, we're going to do with this Stamp Act since it's pissing you Americans off about so much. But at the same time as we do away with the Stamp Act, we're going to tell you that the Great Britain is entitled to rule over Americans in all things, and that they are British subjects and they have no option of being anything other than British subjects, right? Whatever that's called. I can't remember the exact term for that one. Then later on, you've got the Intolerable Acts or the Coercive Acts. I think I'm saying this correct. Watch Michael Bolden. The 10th Amendment Center does a really good job of covering this stuff a lot, and I like to watch every last one of his videos personally. Great coverage of the history. And anyhow, so the next phase, the British were coming for guns. I think that's where the whole Bunker Hill things comes from. Other stuff like that. It's basically the colonists saying, nah, you're not going to take our guns. The British started quartering soldiers in the houses of the people, and saying, we have the right to compel you. We have the right to pass any kind of law we want. Whatever kind of law we pass, you have to obey it, and you have to stay part of Great Britain, right? So these are the summary of the 2 different phases, and I can't break them down perfectly for you off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is what the First Amendment and the Second Amendment do say, and the Third and the Fourth and the Fifth. So I think what the Founding Fathers did when they told the Constitutional Convention people, hey, your whole idea here is making us nervous as heck. We'll only accept it if you agree to, amend the whole thing after ratification. And basically they knew there was a threat. If you don't amend this after ratification, good luck keeping us together, dude. And so they protected the right of the people to peaceably assemble and petition for redress of grievances, which is exactly what the Continental Congress did. You could say Continental Congress was an illegal thing, but they decided to permanently make that kind of thing a legal thing in our American system. Then, so they didn't protect anything like, throwing tea crates off of ships and stuff like that. They didn't protect mob rule. It's very interesting that they left that out of the amendments. It's just not there. It's peaceably assemble and petition for redress of grievances. I would say it doesn't even really have much to do with going into the streets. A little bit maybe, but mostly what should be getting done is similar to what happened there. That was way more effective, way more powerful. Then to say, hey, a militia is very necessary to the protection of a free people. Militia meaning that an armed citizenry So don't mess with our ability to keep and bear arms, dudes. Just don't mess with it. And we're going to agree permanently that the government is not allowed to do that. At some point, you get some handgun legislation start creeping into states and stuff like that. Later on down the road, which there was an instant like complaint, hey, you're violating the Constitution, but dueling was becoming too popular or something like that. I disagree with it. You say infringement? Look, the only valid meaning of the Constitution is the original public meaning. The dictionary definition of the words at the time it receives the consent of the governed. And the only thing that the governed can give their consent to is that which is written down for them. And if you didn't write down a detail, it doesn't exist, because they can't give their consent to something you didn't write down. That's the honest truth of the whole thing. So the people have the right to be equal to your standard soldier in their ability to defend themselves. This is common sense. That is exactly what they're getting at. The right of the people to keep and bear arms, to be that militia, to be the armed citizenry that is capable of defending themselves and their state. Don't mess with it. We're not going to mess with it. We're not going to put permits on it. We're not going to put this on it. We're not going to put background checks on it. None of that kind of stuff. Then the Third Amendment, you can't keep the soldiers in our houses. We're never going to let ever something like that happen again. Fourth Amendment, you can't just come search through our stuff for no good reason. You better dang well have some kind of reasonable proof that a crime has been committed, and you have the right to search our house for further stuff associated with that crime or whatever, I'm summarizing this off the top of my head. And then the Fifth Amendment, even too, very powerful stuff: life, liberty, and property, right? Without the due process of law, which, by the way, there is no due process of law when you're searching for guns. When you're coming and asking to know what kind of guns people own, that's an infringement. That is not due process of law, because it violates. You could say, yeah, well, the Commerce Clause. Look, the last in time rule. When an amendment comes along, if there's anything that it seems to conflict with that came prior, it doesn't matter. What came later, if it conflicts with what was prior, what came later trumps it. Period. That's all there is to it. Otherwise, the amendment process is worthless. And so, anyhow, I just wanted to go ahead and say, I really appreciate our founding fathers. I appreciate the orderly manner in which the Continental Congress handled the whole thing. And I think, too, they weren't hypocrites. They wanted to... That's like some of the first things that were on their mind is a validation of what was done in 1774 through 76, and we're going to protect the ability for that to happen ever again if this form of government that we're creating right now gets out of hand the same way that the British form of government got out of hand. Once again, I've said before, I think for a moral and religious people, especially the officers of government being moral and religious people, any form of government is reasonable. But for a people where the officers of government don't even know what their Article 6, Clause 3 oath of office is, and they don't care, and they're not moral, they're not religious, then, your form of government gets out of hand. When all they're determined to do is to say, we have power to force you to permanently remain in this union, and the Supremacy Clause, what that really means is any law we pass at the federal level, you guys have to obey it. No, that is not what it says. It says it has to be pursuant to the Constitution, which the Constitution gives us the proper purposes of government, the positions of power, the manner in which the people's consent is given to that position of power, the procedures for exercising those powers, the powers enumerated, the powers prohibited, and the promises guaranteed. And if that is being violated in any way whatsoever, and it's being treated like normal, then that is not part of the Supremacy Clause. It's not acceptable, and to impose it on the people, you might as well be doing the British coercive acts again, right? That's really it. So it's not true that the Supremacy Clause gives the federal government absolute win every time, and it's not true. There's still nothing in the Constitution that forces every state to remain in the Union, which is something the British claimed. That was part of something so offensive that we left the Great Britain Union. And so, but our founding fathers, I don't think they were hypocrites. I think that by the time you get done with the first 5 founding presidents, memory gets short. I think, Andrew Jackson, he's scary as hell to me. That dude liked dueling, he liked war, he liked this, he probably had an inferiority complex as far as like, because he really wasn't one of the founding fathers, you know? I don't know, but he trips me out big time, and things started getting scarier from there. That's all there is to it. So anyhow, thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you.